That's 42 million.
The art world, where paintings change hands for fortunes.
Sold. Thank you very much.
Maybe another still waiting to be discovered.
My God, there's a lot to say with this one.
International art dealer Philip Mould and I have teamed up artists. We use old-fashioned detective work and state-of-the-art science to get to the truth.
Science, can I? Don't believe it.
Every case is packed with surprise and intrigue.
It's like a challenge. Who am I?
It's quite what it seems.
Just the sort of thing you might associate with a faked painting.
It's a journey that can end in joy,
It is indeed.
brilliant,
Wonderful.
or bitter disappointment.
The work is not by Henry Moore.
So sorry.
We investigate a painting bought in an online auction from Monaco, which could be by a towering figure of 18 Reynolds.
So I pressed the button. No one else did, and I halted.
Could this be the work of an artist stand the test of time?
People coming back to Reynolds in his own lifetime, saying, what's happened to my face?
Or is there something much murkier lurking beneath the surface?
This could turn out to be one of the most confusing and complicated paintings that I've ever looked at.
And if it does prove to be by Reynolds, will the owner even be allowed to keep it?
So that he writes at all, then?
Probably not. If you have a good eye, don't go hunting for sleepers in France.
The quest has brought us to the most glamorous of locations, but today it calls for a trip to rainy North London.
So why have you brought us to a car dealership?
Oh, there's a reason for this. I want you to meet my friend Glyn. He's a car dealer with a soft spot for art.
We've arranged to meet Glyn Hopkin. His name adorns the bumpers of many a brand new car and passion for 18th century portraits. And he's taken a bit of a gamble he wants to share with us.
Good to see you.
Hi, Glenn.
Good to
Nice
see
to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too.
So, this is what you bought. There's a sort of vital, very sort of human quality to his expression. It's as if he's just setting eyes on all of these cars.
Real, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so it says Puck at the bottom by Reynolds. Or not, as the case may be, said in Some Night's Dream. And that is a face full of mischief, which is what Puck was known for. Famously swapped a man's head for the head of an ass.
Well, I think expression, and also it's as if he's there, sort of like looking out of the painting.
I think you raise a really good point there, because if it's by him, who does take risks, who pushes expressions into new territories.
Where was this on? Drew your eye to Monaco?
Well, it wasn't particularly Monaco. It was just like an online auction. It could have been anywhere.
This is unusual for you, and take a gamble with an artist you don't know particularly well.
Well, I didn't intend to. It's just Sunday morning. There I was with a cup of coffee.
I mean, these things can appear anywhere in the world, and you're sitting on your bed buying them.
So that's what you do with your Sunday mornings. If I'm online shopping on a Sunday, I might buy a pair of shoes. But you decide.
There was no bidding on it, so I pressed the button and I bought it.
Impulse buy.
Impulse buy.
So it was described as in the catalogue.
That's right.
So that means it looks like it could be by Reynolds or someone copying Reynolds,
That's
but
correct,
they
yeah.
can't say it's actually by Reynolds.
That's correct, yeah.
How much did this
It was about £2,700,
Okay.
which, is a fair amount of money, but not if it...
So you're hoping that you might have bought a sleeper, a miscatalogued painting that's in fact the real deal.
Yes.
Joshua Reynolds was a pioneer in 18th century art. Alongside his contemporary, Gainsborough, he defined the face-born Devon in 1723 and set up his studio in London in the 1750s, winning acclaim for his groundbreaks such as his portrait of Omai, depicting a celebrated Polynesian visitor to England. This painting comes with hounds. Could Glyn's picture be another valuable discovery?
So if
2,700.
you might get your money back.
Yeah. But if it is, it's not bad at all, is it? A bit of Sunday morning online shopping.
I need to be more ambitious in my Sunday morning shopping. I know you bought paintings for Glyn many times over the years, but this one, you decided to totally freelance and do this by yourself, and you had nothing to do with it.
Really, Glyn, you're slightly taunting me with this.
Yeah, well...
I think you're showing me that you can do it, can't you?
Well, I like to think I've learned something from the mum.
It'll be unbearable. It's clear Glyn likes a challenge, and I'd like to find out more about his journey from art sleuth. Glyn, your name is pretty well known in the southeast of England for car dealerships. Where did it all begin?
With 3 O-levels, and then I had to find a job. So I got a job as a trainee salesman in the motor trade.
From there,
And then 1992, I opened my first dealership and sort of grown from there up to over 40 dealerships.
And so you've got cars on the one hand and you've got art on the other.
There's a big difference, yes. But I was interested in portraits going back to when I was a DM in Amsterdam. Me and my brother was sort of like, oh, well, we're going to the museum and dragged along, but I was fascinated by the people. You got a glimpse back into 18th century portraiture. I just found it very interesting. Later on, so I was probably about 40, I decided, well, you know what, I think I should... I had to pick an artist, and I liked George Romney.
Since then, Glyn's collected a few more portraits by Romney Reynolds, and he's now chairman of the Romney Society. Could Glyn's knowledge of 18th century art give him the ability to a genuine Reynolds tucked away in a sale room in Monaco? We've got a copy of the sales catalogue here. In the style dans le goût de, so in the style of Sir Joshua Reynolds, portrait de jeune garçon blanc of a young blonde boy. Villa Paloma, inventory 1950, inventory 1934. So that's quite intriguing.
Yeah, because I had no intention of buying it, so I couldn't help myself by not pressing the button.
Right, we need these two different inventories.
Yes.
And so here we are. We're now going to start this investigation, find out if it really is by Joshua Reynolds. How important is it to you to find out if it's a genuine work?
Well, I think it is. I mean, not for financial reasons. It's more of a case where if it is by lost over the years, which can happen. So it's more a case of uncovering something that, you know, was by Reynolds and could be given back.
There's a lot of work to do before that can happen. And first of all, I need to give this portrait a thorough board on a hunch of painting in the style of, in the manner of Joshua Reynolds. Question is, could we be looking at? Presents a child with a rather elfin expression. He's also wearing something rather interesting, a century portrait. But the dress with that collar looks rather Van Dykean of a previous century. It's as if the perhaps it's some role that this child is playing. Something also I'm particularly drawn to, the hands really well. I mean, it's so difficult to get those sort of shapes and bits of foreshortening and the ends of fingers. This is an artist who really knows what he or she is doing. And something's quite evident about this picture by looking at the brand. It's expensive. It's carved, but it doesn't look that old. It looks to me, it could well indicate that at some point it could have been sold as a trophy painting, something significant to the collection. But we are also dealing in an area where there's so much copying, and we need to try and brush all of this aside and focus on whether or not this could be by the man himself.
So how does Glyn's painting, once presented as a prized trophy picture, compare? We're visiting the Wallace collection in London, which boasts an impressive number of the master's works. What a century institution, really. He was obviously hugely popular in his day. Was he considered exciting back then?
He was massively successful. One type of art, a brand of painting that he was particularly good at and very proud of, is through here. 20 years into his painting career, Reynolds produced what he described as his most original picture, Aubrey Girl. And people really responded to the feeling, the expression, the character that it presented. Left-hand corner in the dark, and then make your way up the basket, you can see a flash of red. Strawberries.
So this is an idealised strawberry seller out on the streets.
In 18th century London, you would have seen a lot of these vendors selling things, and he's latched onto that, rather aggrandised it, made it rather exotic as well. And this little girl has got a turban and looks like almost sort of classical robes into what was called a fancy picture.
What does that mean?
So this is such a sort of curious thing that begins to emerge. Half portrait, half a work of the imagination. He started with a face. I can't help thinking of Puck. He started to raft off to say something more, a little bit of theatre. In the 1770s and 80s, Reynolds would see pictures, drawing acclaim for his portrayal of childhood innocence.
I find it hard to follow her face is enchanting, but it's so ghostly, peering out of all this brown and yellow. It looks like it's hung in a puck.
And this is the problem with Reynolds. You've got to forgive the fact that he used all these experimental materials that degraded. I mean, his own lifetime, saying, you know, what's happened to my face? What we're looking at here is not what left the studio when it was freshly painted, and a degradation of the pigments. In fact, the Strawberry Girl has been recently conserved, but much of the old is able to remove. In its early history, glued to a reinforcing canvas and pressed with a hot iron with original paint. Issues similar to this in Glynn's picture might even be encouraging evidence of Reynolds.
Were there particular things then that he did that might help us identify a painting by him?
The very thing that it said is also quite helpful, because these idiosyncratic materials he used are also a way of actually working. There's a lot of potential evidence around.
Armed with a deeper understanding of the artist, we've headed back to the more detail.
This is our first clue. It's what's written on the frame. Puck painted Puck, did he not?
Well, he certainly did. It was one of his best-known pictures. He painted it in 1789, not long before he died, which was commissioned for a gallery of paintings celebrating the works of Shakespeare.
But they look different, don't they? I mean, that is a proper full-blown demonic little sitting on a mushroom, looking every bit the part, and doesn't look much like Glynn's.
Well, it doesn't, you're right. But when you look at comparative sketches for Puck, when you look at it compared to Glynn's picture, you can see some similarities.
Yes, particularly, Erin, just look below. That pointed chin and those lips are really quite similar. Perhaps Glynn's picture is a wide version of that.
Let's see if there's any more clues on the back. The first thing that strikes you is it looks like nothing.
Extraordinary. And the slightly strange or rather disappointing thing is there doesn't seem to be much information, except top right label. But there's a catch, because that's pasted onto a frame, which I reckon can't be any earlier than about 1900.
Provenance is going to be absolutely crucial. So we know that Glynn bought the picture in 2022. It's now in London. It came believed, as far as we can tell, to have been in the possession of the same family since 1950. Before that, it belonged to Mrs. Hudson Monaco.
And what can you tell me about Villa Paloma?
Well, you can see it in this fabulous picture of Monaco in the 1920s. I mean, look at us. And Villa Paloma is here on the hilltop. And inventories of Villa Paloma tell us before that it belonged to him in 1934. And this Mrs. Hudson was his second wife.
How was it described?
It was described as Puck, by Reynolds, in the style of Reynolds, but by Reynolds.
Well, that's useful.
It's encouraging. Robert William Hudson moved to Richmond. And here he is, look at this. He looks like a carriage driver. Though living in that villa, I'm sure he wasn't a carriage driver. He must have been a very wealthy man. What would he got the painting from? And what is that painting? Is it a Puck or is it not?
It's frustrating, isn't it? Only taking us so perhaps there's something in the paint itself. We know he was a complex painter. He used extraordinary things. Perhaps there's...
It looks like science is going to be key if we're to link. So I brought Puck to the Courtauld Institute in London for some expert analysis by Professor Aviva Bernstock.
Right, all the way from Monaco via a car showroom. What's your first response?
Yeah, it's fitting by Reynolds. But, of course, I'm not sure until I've looked more closely at it.
Shall I turn it over?
That would be useful.
Together like an 18th century picture.
Looks like a very coarsely woven, cheap canvas. But what's interesting about it, it had another canvas adhered to the back. It hasn't been lined, which you would expect a painting of significant age to have been.
Even the way the picture is nailed to its wooden support can yield important clues.
This edge.
So this is the edge of the stretcher, but there's no canvas going around the edge, and it's not attached in the same cut on this edge, and nails have been put through the front of the canvas to hold it in place, just on one side, which is kind of unusual.
Yeah, a bit crude. So what you've been able to determine is that it has strips of paintings of this period have been onto a new canvas. We're looking at the original old canvas.
Yes.
And it's also most unusual.
Of the very coarse canvas through the paint, it's really made a clear impression on the surface of the paint.
These ripples are like veins coming through.
See, did Reynolds use anything like it? Another concern is the amount of restoration we're seeing.
Some repaint on them. I would want to look in UV light to see whether we can see any areas of reworking or retouching.
While Philip grapples with the paint, I'm on the paper trail. The auction listing for Glynn's paint is the official list of Reynolds' work. But these catalogues can be a treasure trove of information. I'm looking for any mention of a picture named Puck. Shepherdess, Samuel. And then O.P. The Puck. The only picture in the catalogue with the title Puck is the impish figure on the toadstool. So I'm widening the search to other pictures of under 4B. Oh, hang on. So now number 2019, Monte Carlo. And it quotes Ellis Waterhouse, who was a previous authority on Reynolds. Seen at Sotheby's, upper hands, in the south of France, brackets Monte Carlo. And of course we know that Glyn bought his painting at an auction in Monte Carlo. Rent Puck. Standing shy on the left in the landscape, a little to the right of the canvas, yes. Dark chestnut red coat, yes. Brown chestnut mass of hair, no. And he'd only looked at Polaroid, so I don't think we can be too... Certainly a fancy picture, and it looks to me convincing as a Reynolds. Well, that's pretty good. It's encouraging to saw a photo of Glyn's painting and thought it could be a genuine Reynolds. But what would he have made of it if he'd seen it in the flesh?
Back at the Courtauld Institute, Aviva is using ultraviolet fluorescence to look for evidence of later overpaint. Hard to assess the quality of the original picture. Natural resin varnish used in the past glows under UV light. It floats darkly on top. It's not a flattering look for either of us.
These dark spots, that's probably later retouching to cover up damages. Probably on top of the varnish, I would say. Or less dark changes, blotches on the face, for example, which probably were done underneath the varnish, and maybe they're reworking. And I know that this part of the composition, which is the foliage in the background, is particularly complex. And you see here, there aren't too many retouchings, but there's proper composition.
So what this tells us, even though we don't know exactly when and how it happened, is that there is a lot on this surface, possibly, but unquestionably at a later date as well, things that have been added.
It's difficult for me to tell when these changes were made. Do a lot more looking to know that.
But what this does tell us is that a lot has gone on upon this surface.
Absolutely. This could turn out to be one of the most confusing and complicated paintings that I've ever looked at.
The next step, the picture in more depth, with infrared and X-ray photography, and to take a microscopic sample of the paint, which will how these complex layers have been applied.
I've been investigating the earliest known owner of Glyn's painting, Robert William Hudson, who we know had the painting in Monaco. And we've come to Danesfield House on the banks of the River Thames. And this is where the owner of your painting used to live.
A nice clock tower as you come in. It looks very picturesque in the snow as well.
It does, it's beautiful. And not only did he live here, he actually built this place a lot older.
It does indeed, yes.
Hudson was heir to the Hudson's soap flake bit that went with it. He was an art collector. Did Glyn's picture ever hang in this house? An article which was written not long after Hudson died, and it talks about this place and about the man. Look, do you want to have a look? And it's so this wasn't the only place he built.
Mr. Hudson decided to move south and purchase an ancient house and estate at Danesfield, midway between where we are.
Now, it turns out that Mrs. Hudson, she must have been so proud of this building that she had photographs commissioned of the rooms in 1908. Your picture in these.
I can't see it there. These seem to be prints of some sort.
But there are other photos of other rooms.
Right.
And on a first floor landing, so see if you can see your painting.
I can't see it there.
And who are these paintings by?
By Gainsborough.
And what about the big one just on the next wall?
And the big painting was a Turner.
So this looks like the kind of collection of Reynolds.
It looks like he's collecting all the top British artists.
Hudson had clearly filled his new house with trophy pictures by the time these photos were no sign of Puck. I was really hoping with all the photographs of the interiors of this house that we would find...
That would have been easy though, wouldn't it?
Well, it would have been nice.
That would have been easy. The painting could have been sitting behind the photographer. That's right, yeah.
Sadly, this is where the Provenance Trail runs cold. We know where Robert Hudson bought, but no hint of his purchase of Puck by Reynolds.
We need to turn to Joshua Reynolds himself, Glyn's picture. And we've come to the Royal Academy of Arts, where Reynolds served as the first president from 1768. Dr. Rebecca Lyons, who can show me important evidence of how the artist worked.
Rebecca, this is an extraordinary looking one.
Well, we've called it Studio Experiments in Colour and Media. It's almost like a slightly extended version.
It's full of tones, colours, and information and writing. Can you deconstruct it a bit?
Well, you see blue blob there down the right-hand side, which says Prussian blue, and then CR beside it. And that is a binder or wax layer that is involved. We have a bit further up here, he's talking about orpiment, wondering what these look like when that varnish layer is added, something that perhaps gives his own painting gracery.
So do we get a sense that he's trying to keep it secret?
He was very secretive about the recipes for his paint. Who was in his studio for 5 years, said that the master used to lock away his secrets. He wasn't willing, in a way, to share all of his practice with his students.
It's a really interesting point that he worked as his assistants.
What you can see with Reynolds is that when he changes his mind, he paints over it, but he doesn't remove what he... So you tend to build up a much thicker surface on a Reynolds with all the changes of mind underneath those layers, in a way that for the students, of course, they're copying the last version, the last iteration.
And I think that's really important. If he's not passing these techniques onto his assistants, if we find them in the picture, this could be able to prove the case for Glyn's painting.
The Royal Academy also houses remarkable rictus in his diaries or pocketbooks. I'm hoping to find some sign of Reynolds' work on Glyn's picture.
So we're lucky to have 27 of these little pocketbooks once belonging to Reynolds, and within them, day by day, his professional, and to an extent, his personal life.
Can I see?
Certainly.
So these are the people that came and sat
Next to them, they're sitters. They're coming for portrait sittings. But when it comes to non-portrait pictures...
Yes, because I think that's what we're dealing with here.
If we come to 1787 here, so there we are in September.
Oh, I see what you mean. 2 there's 10 Hercules. Oh, that's the known painting
As far as
by
we're
Reynolds
aware,
of Hercules?
yeah, the famous picture of young
Oh,
Hercules.
you've looked through all these. And you know the painting you're investigating. Is there anything in any of these that can provide evidence to show our child is in the picture?
All we have in every case is nothing more than boy or girl, or maybe fancy picture he was painting.
And I guess some of these children, many of these children, in fact, we know were just street children, urchins that he liked.
You can imagine
to
the
paint
teeming
them.
streets of the Strand. Picking. There were plenty of people on the street to pick from.
No chance of written evidence. But could these notebooks yield physical clues? Then I've got to ask, these splotches of paint.
They are indeed a bit of a million or something. There are in this book, actually, I think. There's some more of the same. We go to September. Splotch there.
Yes! I wonder if we can analyse these paint splotches. I mean, look at that colour. There's not a million miles from the chestnut red coat of the boy in there.
Well, you're fortunate because these books have recently been analysed and the research has been published in terms of the chemical composition so that they could be compared to some of the completed works.
Right. I shall take a look at that.
We've arranged for Glyn's picture to be transported to a conservation studio not far from the Royal Academy, where it can be examined. A Reynolds specialist, a conservator at the National Portrait Gallery, who's analysed the pigments in the pocketbooks. I brought Glyn along.
Hello, Alex.
Hi, Philip.
So you've received the Aviva. Have you been able to compare that with what we've come across at the Royal Academy?
Yes, I've been able to look at the sample cross-section that Aviva sent to me, and you can see this red paint layer at the top.
And precisely where on the canvas is this red that you're referring to?
From this background area here, so the red is part of the foliage paint. And then these are 2 samples that were taken from the experimental cat and vermilion, and both of these pigments are present in this top layer of paint in the sample that Aviva took. And we can also see, which is a close-up of one of those splashes of paint that was in the pocket books. And this was also a mixture of vermilion and red lead, so just like...
Underneath the promising red pigment, Alex has identified more paint layers.
layers below this red layer of paint. One of them is the blue of the sky.
And that looks to me, I may be wrong, in the middle of the other layers. Now that's alarm bells for me because that would suggest another campaign of painting, that the painting had been for or someone else was working on top, like overpaint is.
I would agree, but not with Reynolds. He often uses varnish like...
Sections from authentic works by Reynolds often show at least one layer of tinted varnish underneath the upper paint.
That same complexity, that real idiosyncrasy of Joshua Reynolds appears in your picture.
Yeah. That's some good news.
We're making progress, but the technical photographs are more problematic.
Well, Aviva sent through an infrared image. They're good at showing is where there's underdrawing.
So when you say underdrawing, you mean drawing that's been put there first by some position?
Yes, we're seeing some underdrawing around the face and the eyes and nose. So some of the features have been drawn in before.
Which is probably not what you'd expect the sort of free painting Joshua Reynolds to be doing if this was an original composition.
Call of Reynolds' technique.
The presence of these drawing lines requires explanation, and there are more concerns.
This X-ray doesn't look quite like any other X-ray of a Reynolds that I've seen. And maybe we can compare it to the poor Yothalagotquin that's in the Waterston collection. Can you see here how the figure is very clearly...
The anomalies in Glyn's picture raise questions we may only be able to answer by taking more invasive...
There's so much restoration on this painting that I'm having trouble discerning things on the surface that I might attribute to Reynolds.
No paint on.
It would, but Reynolds paintings are often quite damaged, so you might find something scary underneath.
Let's go.
It's a big risk, but Glyn's determined to find. Meanwhile, I've been looking into the time it spent in private hands in Monaco, and I've encountered a few obstacles of my own. I tend to talk to us in Monaco, and we had real difficulty getting the necessary permissions to film. I'm also getting the image about this picture, potentially a legal problem that I need to get to the bottom of. So I'm going to go and get some expert advice. I've arranged to meet Pierre Valentin, a lawyer we've consulted in the past. He spent the last 25 years intricacies of art and the law. Pierre, we're investigating a painting that a British owner bought in Monaco, Reynolds at the time, but our owner, Glyn, hopes it could be, and that's what we're looking into. If it does turn out to be Reynolds, legal issues at all?
If it was bought in France or Monaco, unfortunately the answer is yes. The seller, say, in the style of or after, can go to court and ask for the sale to be declared null and void, what we call in legal jargon fundamental mistake, which is effectively a mistake as to the fundamesques, the artist who made it.
So the person who sold the painting can effectively what?
Cancel the sale.
Get it back.
You, if you are the buyer, let's say you have a very good eye and you see things that no one else sees. You spot Sleeper, which is a painting that's sold as copy, but in fact it is by the artist.
And of course, this is something we investigate all the time.
It was a pumpkin into a princess. Because you bought it in France, you have to return the princess to the seller of the pumpkin.
Faith, in this case, it's Glyn. Does he not have any rights at all, then?
Probably not. I mean, what could happen is that the seller could come to England, to the English court, and the English court could well apply French law and say, fundamentally, give it back.
Wow, so an English court can apply the law of a different country?
Yes.
And is there any kind of time
limitation rule in France? I would say around 5 years, but starting from the date when the seller discovered is not.
So not from the date of the sale,
No.
but from when the seller realises that he or she may have sold a painting.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So it makes me think that Glyn is in a position where he can't really win. If we do establish it as and the owner wants it back, he'll have to hand it back.
That's what's peculiar about the French system. If you have a good eye, don't.
While Pierre heads off to his next art emergency, I've got the unenviable job of... It's a bit of a shocker, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't believe it. So some buyers here, they do all the work and they get it back again.
That is the case.
Excellent.
But given that you like the painting, and you'd like to hang on to it, which outcome would you...
Absolutely, I still like it. It's by Reynolds, and I'd still like it to be great.
You could end up losing it.
Yeah.
In that case, all systems go.
We're off, right, okay. Keep me informed what's happening, Leslie.
Glyn is pressing. Hand the picture over to Simon Gillespie, who's restored many Reynolds paintings in the past. I'm intrigued to know what Simon made.
We've had a look at the ultraviolet photograph, seen the X-ray. The first thing that's apparent is that almost a fifth of what we're seeing is later.
Nothing to do with Reynolds.
Nothing to do with Reynolds at all.
Exactly. Whenever we're presented with a paint as this, we'd always like to try and take it off to reveal the original paint underneath and try and get back to the original artist's ideas. Up to he uses all sorts of different materials, sometimes water, colour, sometimes wax, sometimes oil, sometimes resin, and you see them in a rather sort of black, brown state because they're impossible to do anything with.
So in art world terms, in conservation terms, challenging as you can get.
Absolutely.
Could we just discuss the back of the picture?
Yeah, let me take it off.
ever seen a canvas like that before?
I've never seen a canvas like that. Well, very seldom have I seen such heavy postman sack like this used. Well, it could be a rather negative clue, couldn't it, seeing that we haven't found one like this. But it would be very easy to match this canvas with another one if we find one.
While Simon starts to strip away the most recent layers of restoration, I've gone back to basics which might provide some clues. There's nothing here like our boy in a red coat, but there is a girl who's shy. Now look at this. See, I think this does look like Glenn's picture. It's a girl called Robinetta. This is a painting by Joshua Reynolds. But look at the hair and the expression and that. Could there be a connection between Puck and Robinetta? Is this the evidence we've been looking for? Down the original painting. And I've invited a specialist on Reynolds' fancy pictures to the gallery to tell me more about it. You'll trust Dr. John Chu. It really struck me when I saw this picture, John, that the face here is remarkably similar. What can you tell me about it?
Well, this is a really well-documented Reynolds fancy picture. It's been in the same family since it's been about 1786, bought by Wilbraham Tolnash in 1787.
Is it unusual to have a provenance like that?
It is for weren't sold.
And so the ones that didn't get sold, what happened to them?
They stayed in the studio, so they remained unfinished collection.
And then after he died?
Some of them he left to his friends. Some of them were sold in a big sale of his studio effects. And then some of it was his heir.
And in terms of how Reynolds worked and what was going on in his studio when he was creating these fancy pictures.
Reynolds was unconventional in many ways as a painter. This is a great example of the way he worked, because you'll see the same face in many of these pictures, those features. So in this instance, it's a little girl with a robin at her shoulder. In another version of this picture, she's seen warming her hands by each time.
So there won't be more than one Robinetta that looks exactly like this?
So we have written accounts of how these pictures came into being, so we have to go on the go at the same time. So you've got to imagine like the face in the middle and then the picture being created around each face. The studio for many years, and he's returned to them again and again. So there's a really wonderful example of this in the Tate collection. A painting now has a version of the Strawberry Girl underneath it. So possibly 10 years later, he's coming back and painting a whole new composition inspired by it, but obliterating it in the process.
Gosh, so there could be a whole other painting beneath some of these fancy paintings.
Yeah.
Is it conceivable that Reynolds could have taken the same child and put that child in a different scenario and even changed the gender? I'm wondering if it is possible then that the picture we're looking at is a kind of version of this, but in a completely different setup and as a boy instead of a girl. So where do these ideas Tim and I have met up to exchange theories? I'm struck by the way Reynolds was painting in the atmosphere in his studio.
And that might possibly be infrared. You've gone just beneath the paint surface, and you can see that there are outlines, distinct outlines, found at the edge of the hair and the chin. Now here's the problem. We know that outlines were or originated work, not for the first version of something.
No, because what he would do is he'd get his assistants to trace the outline of the original, lose it, on the second painting, and then of course he would work his magic. So what I'm wondering is, could this be a version of a different Reynolds picture? Because we know he did that. So look at this painting. I was very struck when I first saw it. This is Robinetta, struck by the similarities between her little face and that in Glenn's picture. So if this is a version of to match, I mean, the outline of the faces, for example, would have to be the same.
And we can actually overlay them and have...
Amazing.
I mean, it's really very striking.
Look at that. Look at the shape of the face and the position of the eyes.
And if we go in closer still...
And the chin.
And it's things like the set of the eyes and the angle of the head. They're compelling.
So distinctive, that shape, isn't it? So perhaps one of Reynolds' studio assistants copied the outline of Robinette. Reynolds then turned into Puck. But what about that thick, coarse canvas?
Everyone has been worried about that, but I've been print of a lost painting, a destroyed painting by Joshua Reynolds. It was lost in about 1816, and it's a huge stained glass window. And the painting itself was very, very big. And it was painted on fluted canvas that was used instead of carpet in those days.
So it would be a big piece of material and very coarse in order to withstand the wear.
Painting of the size that this needed to be. Normal canvas wouldn't have been available.
I mean, that is brilliant. We know he used it before. why he'd use it for a portrait seems a bit of a stretch. I mean,
Evidence starts with theories, and this painting is being restored. What might lie beneath could give us the answer.
But as the restoration workers gathered pace, we've had a worrying update from the students.
Through from Simon Gillespie of the bottom left-hand corner of the picture, which shows very clearly 4 numbers, 1830, assume is a date, 1830. Now, if that is the case, it's a serious problem, because that's almost after Reynolds died. We've got to get to the bottom of this.
His work stripping back the more modern paint layers has exposed a number of troubling elements. Before going further,
So, what about this date? Where is it?
So if you wet out the date in red, bright red paint, 1830. When did Reynolds die? 1790s.
Date of 1830, and there's no artist's name with it.
That's the peculiar thing. Normally somebody who's going to put a date on a picture would put...
Simon believes that large parts of the present composition correspond to the 1830 date, including the blondes. All this has been concealed by a modern top layer of paint and varnish applied with considerable skill, some of which...
So here you've got the remains of the yellow varnish that's been put on quite recently, in the last 15 years. Brown, tinted, recent varnish. Very clearly visible here. It has deceived all of us, I think, into thinking that it is an old surface, but it isn't.
Removing the modern Van 30 layer, and beneath that, a much more muted portrait appears through the gaps. This is our last hope, but Simon has uncovered yet another layer.
A lot of it is visible. You can see the clouds and bits of blue. And I think there is a...
It now seems that this picture began with a reused canvas depicting sky. The cloud had dominated the X-ray. On top of that is the first portrait, possibly unfinished. Then comes the 18th, the modern varnish and restoration paint.
What might happen if you went to the
We'll be able to look through some of the opened areas or unpainted areas to see the original paint, which suggests that there is a portrait size of the portrait we've got here now.
But we still don't know to what degree we're being deceived, and how much was there originally.
Can safely say is that the golden curves are going to go, and his red jacket's going to go, and a lot more blue sky is going to be more apparent.
But that is a big risk as well, isn't it? I mean, getting to that layer.
Well, if there is a risk of damaging the original paint, we won't go there because it's going to be even more damaged.
This is not good news. If a Reynolds lies beneath, we may now never reach...
Glenn, you're looking surprisingly relaxed after that.
Yes, well, I'm looking relaxed on the outside. Not so relaxed on to these things. I've bought some Romneys before that I know had overpaint on, and you hope that it's going to be good underneath, and I've been...
Silver lining in all of this, and that is that if this turns out badly, well, at least the French won't be after you.
Yeah, another fine mess you got me into.
It was your idea.
Yeah.
Restoration work finally finished. We've regrouped at the gallery to see the result.
So here's little Puckle, I was hoping.
Whatever happened to that sweet little boy? And has all the overpaint gone now?
Unfortunately not. Simon thought it was unseen. And what we have here, well, is a sort of unresolved piece of restoration.
It's really confusing looking at this picture now. What exactly are we looking at?
I think beneath this later paint, I suspect, lies a sketch by Reynolds. And someone later on deleted it, as they think it should look.
Well, that's interesting because there were a lot of unfinished pictures and sketches hanging around in Reynolds' studio after he died.
Illuminating example of that. This is a portrait thought to be of Francis Barber, servant to Samuel Johnson. And you see that blocked in with a few strokes, it really wouldn't surprise me that something similar could lie beneath.
We've just got theories, haven't we? It was not a great position to be in.
And we've now got one of the world's leading experts on Reynolds walking in to be really difficult.
The man making a decision on this complex work is Dr. Martin Postleby. He's agreed to review all the evidence and examine the painting in detail. Whether the foremost authority on the work of Joshua Reynolds believes his picture is by Reynolds. Glenn, hello. Are you worried about what the outcome will be?
I don't think worried. I was always hopeful it would be a genuine Reynolds, so I think it turned out to be the real thing.
After studying the picture at length, Martin Postle is joining us to deliver his verdict.
Yeah, hi.
Hello, Martin.
Hi, Phil.
So, have you been able to reach a verdict?
Yes, I have a verdict. So, about an artist who is replicated and constantly copied. And I think what is being produced here, this is my hypothesis, has produced a pastiche of a Reynolds subject pictures. You could even call it a homage, so that he is sitting thinking, I'm painting silence like a painting by Joshua Reynolds. There are too many factors to make me think that this is by Joshua Reynolds.
Martin, can you totally discount the possibility that there is a Reynolds of sorts beneath the later
Oreos? A scrap of canvas gets picked up, gets reused. Reynolds does a little sketch. So it is not beyond the bounds possibility, but it is simply, I'm going to say, about 5% max, if that.
Not.
Well, I mean, I'm sure Martin's right.
Still happy you brought it?
Of course, yeah, because you learn these things. You're not going to win the lottery, are you? So I'm glad. I'm glad I bought it, and it's still a charming image.
Well, I think in this instance, we say circle of Joshua Reynolds, which doesn't discount the possibility of having a little dab.
Yes, I think we can go there, if we can stay with that.
Well, I think his painting looks nothing like as lovely as when he first bought these. He loves buying at auctions around the world, doesn't he? If we've learned anything. So on the upside, at least he hasn't had to give it back.
But so often, with old paintings, they have paint on their surface that shouldn't be there. That there's something exciting beneath. And sometimes it goes wrong. It's there for a reason. But, fortunately, you'll never make any discoveries.
If you think you have an undiscovered masterpiece, or precious bc.co.uk/fake or fortune.